So just what we're looking at, we're going to look at exercise documentation. Because you know, it ain't over until the paperwork's done. That's just how it works, unfortunately. And there is potentially a lot of paperwork depending on your type of exercise and how many agencies are involved in your exercise. So at the end of this lesson, we should be able to identify what the documentation requirements are. And I have a feeling there's going to be some activities that we'll have to complete. And then again, it'll all tie back to what you guys started with your other activities. So the documentation is going to show that we have an accurate account of our exercise. There's some things that you'll need to take into consideration, such as control of your documentation. So I know that in my time in the military, a lot of our documents were classified. So you can't share those, they have to stay in a lot of space. There's only certain things in the state of Florida that are exempt from the Sunshine Law. Law enforcement operations, investigations, I'm pretty certain those are exempt. Things dealing with patients are exempt. There's a HIPAA law that says they can't reveal medical information, personal information. So largely, our documents are subject to the Sunshine Law. You know, now, when it comes to sensitive things that we don't want players to have, for example, the controller evaluate handbook, the measles, for example, or the injects, because that's the exercise. We closely control those via our secret scrolls, right? And we just kind of mark them as for exercise staff only. You know? So it's not an official classification. But everybody knows, oh yeah, I probably shouldn't be looking at that, or I need to make sure I take care of that documentation. So you always want to double check your documentation. And remember yesterday I said about printing, if you use a shared printing, leaving your paperwork out there. So those are things you kind of need to think about as you move through here. So here's our exercise documentation by exercise type. All right, so sit-mans are typically, for our purposes, a lot of you in here are working on tabletop exercises in theory when you're doing your objectives. So you would use the sit-man. Seminars, it's kind of optional. Personally, all the seminars I've ever done, I've never done a sit-man, but I may have provided like an executive briefing or an overview white paper that when they walk away, they actually have my whatever 30-minute or 1-hour session in a synopsis on a one-page paper, an at-a-glance look. Facilitator's guide. Again, this is discussion-based. This is controlled information. All right? This has not only what the players have, typically what I do in my, my facilitator's guide, I may put some leading questions in there for the facilitator to ask the participants. Or I may put in some, I may cut and paste parts of a plan that is relevant to the questions that are in there, so they have the information immediately available as they're working through the process. Multimedia presentations, again, tabletop exercises, but I've used these in full scales as well. So you can have exercises within an exercise. I know, for example, this go back probably 2, maybe 3 years ago, statewide hurricane exercise. We were talking about how to better integrate the recon capability across emergency support functions. So we kind of had a tabletop exercise within the full-scale exercise to talk through and work through how that might work. So I've seen examples of that quite a bit. Your exercise plan, that goes to the players and observers. It kind of gives them the rules of the road. It may include things like your objectives, safety measures, communication measures. So I've got an example here that I'll pass around. This was from 2014, the Hurricane Jones exercise. And I believe I have another one here. And this is the one that was completed last week for the Emerald Coast Healthcare Coalition. And it was called Hard Day's Night. And that's what the players and observers get. Your controller evaluator handbook may have specific information in terms of communications, how they're going to communicate between controllers and evaluators, or evaluators to evaluators, or to the exercise director, or what the safety precautions are, what's things you may have to specifically be aware of. Again, a lot of this is secret scroll information that you don't necessarily want your players to have their hands on, because it may also include other things related to the evaluation. So the measles, we've kind of talked about that. We passed around some measles earlier, master scenario event listing, and those are primarily for your operational based exercises. We talked a little bit about the extended play agreement earlier. It doesn't lock them in, but when you have to sign a document, you kind of think about it a little bit, So that's how we try to grip them in. And I showed you that website earlier, the Prep Toolkit website. I think they have a copy there for you to utilize. Our exercise evaluation guides. Those are basically a checklist, we'll call it. And I don't know if I have any of those with me. I do not, but what I do have, which I like to include in my CE handbook, are site maps. Now, I didn't. So I have done site maps that that I actually will draw on the map and include in my my CE plan that shows where the play area is, what's in play, what's out of play, depending on my staff. So in my previous life, my evaluators came from 4 corners of the states. So we would descend on wherever, and nobody knew where anything was. So we would give them directions on how to get to the areas that they needed to be in. So you may want to consider doing that when you're creating your CE handbook. Again, your EEGs, basically, those are the tasks that are necessary to complete the objectives. So you may have critical tasks and just regular tasks that have to be accomplished. You may also want to include your reference in there as well, because that will be helpful to the evaluators. And then the participant feedback form. Did this exercise work for you? It was kind of level 1 stuff that Mike was talking about yesterday in training. So, any questions on this slide? There's a lot of stuff on there. We're going to talk about some of it in depth, and then at the end of this, we can go back and say, hey, did I cover everything you wanted to cover here? Okay. So I try to bring examples, and if you need to see something, I can find it online pretty quickly. So our sit mans provide for the discussion-based exercises, the tabletop exercise. I showed you a copy earlier on screen. And in fact, let me pull that up for you. Let me scroll through get you a better feel. Oh, there it is. All right. So here's our SIP manual. Go back up here a little bit. Exercise name, our dates, our scope. Some of these things, yeah, as we talked earlier, we may have determined that during our C&O or our initial planning meeting, right? So our core capabilities, our objectives. So we've got general information. You can see where we got the objective from. So ASPR, or Public Health Emergency Prep. Participant roles and responsibilities. Here's what players do. Here's what observers, evaluators, facilitators. Here's our structure, module 1, 2, and 3. We've divided the groups, the participants into 3 groups. So when you set up when the participants come in, we say, okay, patient care, they're going to occupy a table, kind of like you guys are occupying a table right now. And then we'll have planning, logistics, and command and operations. Assumptions and artificialities. See, a lot of this information in here is stock to the templates that are posted online that I talked about. You may need to tweak them, but largely we just leave them because they're applicable and they work for us. So we'll talk about EEGs, after action report. So a little introduction, here's the purpose. We give a little history before we get started. The background. This is how we're going to do this as a facilitated discussion. And here's module 1. So this kind of gives you a shape for this. If you can take a look at that top paragraph, gives you a feel for the scenario. And we kind of did the scenario development earlier, so this is kind of the feel, right? And then I'm going to skip down to so here are the questions for the groups. So now we take a break, we say discuss these questions at your table, assign a group spokesperson, and then we come back around in 20 minutes. You tell us what you think. So some of these questions are targeted specifically at a functional group, and then we move into module 2 and we advance the exercise moving forward. So that's your sit man, and sit man is used for what type of exercise?
Tabletop.
Discussion based? Tabletops? Okay, facilitator guide. We kind of talked about that in the multimedia presentation. Facilitator guide. Again, they have templates that you can start with, but you can't end that. You've got to marry it up to your scenario. You've got to marry it up to your presentation. So all these, there's a marriage of things here. There's a system of systems. You've got your slide that's got to match your sit man, that's got to also match your facilitator's guide. The facilitator's guide is going to have more information so that facilitator can drive the discussion, may add points. Yes, sir?
But that's not you as the creator of this, that's somebody who's falling under your chain of command?
Either one.
Well, it's the exercise planning team that will develop these together. So how you structure that exercise planning team, you may have, so for a larger exercise, and I think our team did this last week, they organized as kind of an incident command structure. The incident commander was actually the exercise director. Then we had a logs section that took care of all the stuff that was associated with the exercise, logistics, behind the scenes stuff. And they also had the plan section that also helped coordinate all the documentation. And then the operations section worked with plans to figure out how operationally we were going to execute this exercise in terms of where evaluators are going to be, where controllers are going to be, staging areas, who's going to man those staging areas, victim controllers. So they organize that way. You have to figure out, who's designing this exercise? Is it just you? Are you the person responsible for the whole thing and just you? Or do you have a team? Or can you enlist the team to help? So,
But wouldn't that be a collaboration of all the agencies that are involved? The design of the scenario?
so there's many answers to that question. So if I'm doing a tabletop exercise for my bureau, what other agencies are there? If I am doing an exercise for the Department of Health, then certainly I have multiple divisions, multiple bureaus that could be a part of that. So yes, that would be yes. If you're doing a statewide hurricane exercise, exponentially yes.
Right.
So it's scaled. The answer to your question is scalable based on what your objectives are and what's your target. What's your target audience? Who are the participants? So if you're doing a drill, that's typically just a team or maybe one person. So it all depends on how you frame that question, I guess. Did I answer that?
Yes.
Did I answer it by not answering? All right. So in the multimedia presentation, and I've seen some really great multimedia presentations where there's embedded video clips. There's phone calls, recorded phone calls to like 911 dispatch. We did an exercise back in the late 1990s. It was highly infectious disease. It was in Tucson, Arizona. We had multiple emergency response partners, including the military, and we had video clips. We had calls going to 911. My baby's sick, and it elevates the level of the tension in the room. Versus me standing at the head of the table. Okay, the baby's sick. Okay. But when you have somebody on the phone call, and so we're in Tucson, it was a Hispanic woman with an accent, so that made it realistic. And there's a baby crying in the background while she's on the call with 911. Does that amp things up a little bit, do you think? So think about those things. It doesn't just have to be a dry PowerPoint. Throw in pictures, throw in video clips. Just make sure you're not stealing copyright stuff, okay? I don't want you to do that. Any questions on this lot? How do we feel? Is this all doable to you? It's within reach. I think it's kind of low hanging fruit. Okay, operations based. I've got those exercise plans floating around. Take a look at those again. You can go to that website and you can pull down draft documents here. This is a little bit of a heavier effort. It does take more interaction with your partners. Typically, I mean, certainly I've done full-scale units. Let's go back to my law enforcement days back in the 80s when I was evaluating a law enforcement response. So, whether it would be a hostage situation, whatever, typically it was just targeted towards the law enforcement that was on shift. We were validating the capability of the shift command and control and the response. We didn't really necessarily involve or evaluate the other potential folks that could be involved in, like EMS, we didn't involve them. This was just the shift-only kind of exercise. Do you guys do that? Just shift-only exercises?
I don't know. No, not necessarily.
Okay. We used to do that back in the day. And I've been out of it for quite a while, so. And you have enough calls during the day and night anyway, so you may not have time to do that. So that could be an example of an exercise that you may not have a heavy lift in terms of coming up with an X plan, even if you use an X plan. You may not use an X plan for that kind of thing because it's kind of a drill, but it's also a full-scale kind of thing. So, but when you get into these larger multi-agency exercises, statewide exercise, coalition exercise, you need to be able to give the players some guidance, and that guidance comes via the form of the X plan. So it gives them the scope, the objectives, core capabilities, the roles and responsibilities. Typically, it talks about safety and security policies, communications, and I passed around the maps already. So you could put the maps in there to show them, hey, this is the play area, keep it in there. Once you leave there, it's no longer the play area. The controller evaluator handbook. Again, this talks about the roles and responsibilities of the controller. It contains detailed scenario information. So you may not only have the here's what's happened, but you may also have here's what their response should be. Or it may contain snippets of the plan's policy or procedure that drives that. So it gives you a better understanding. This has always been a standalone document for my exercises. It's not an attachment to the X plan, but certainly you can do that if you'd like. So basically what that means is participants get part A and controllers get part A and part B. Okay? So, and then you can separate even the controllers from the evaluators altogether as well. I've done that before. It's just easier for me to maintain one document for the controllers and evaluators, and they can flip back and forth to where they need to be. Questions so far? All right. Master scenario event listing. Here's what I hope. I hope that when you walk away from this class, that you will be able to use the terminology without confusing what a measle is and what an inject is. They're two different animals. One builds the other, okay? Because I have people, and they'll call them measles. You know what the measles are? It drives me, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard. Stop it, you know? So, your master scenario event listing. We passed one around yesterday, yes? So, I have seen, oh boy, probably a 24-hour, 5-day-a-week measle, which was probably at least 200 pages. You know, and so that's kind of a bear to carry around. You know, if you're an evaluator, right? What injects are going in at what time? And this was back before you had these smartphones, and tablets. You know, so and I had an old military map bag. I've had my EEG stuck in there. I have my measles stuck in there. I have guidance stuck in there. And then, if you're evaluators, remember to wear comfortable shoes because you may be standing a while, walking around for a while. But so you pull out this thing and you're like, okay, tear off that page. We're done with that one. Let's keep going. And so, or you'd line out. Then we got to the point where I would just cut and paste and create in a new tab just those injects that I need to look at. Right? So it'll give me what time it's going in. I still have the other one if I needed it, but I just print out the ones that I need to be at and I need to look at or I was responsible for. So think about that in terms of, and the measles comes in very handy if you're working in the sim cell, because you'll see a number of those as we discussed that sim cell will deliver these things. So if you're running the sim cell, you're maintaining that battle rhythm, right? So this room, when we do the full-scale exercise, this room is packed with people, or it has been. Over here on the left-hand side, you have about 8 to 10 FSU students that were doing social media stuff, Facebook and whatever else. They were doing that. And you've got other tables representing different regions or counties and that weren't playing, because remember, SimCell is representing those folks that are not playing. If they're playing, then you just call them, right? So, so they're operating off, and the senior controller in here is operating off that measles, that's the scenario event list, to make sure that injects are going in on time. Now, I know last week, for example, I think it was last week, that things were slowing down for the players. You don't want bored players. Okay? You want to keep them going, keep them busy. Because then they start thinking, well, this is a pack exercise. They're not even exercising. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting there, right? So the exercise director would call the senior controller up here and say, hey, you need to pick up the pace for ESF 8, whoever. Okay, and then they start putting in injects again, and things start dancing again. So those injects that you build, that are used to build the measles, and that's the scenario event listing, that establishes the battle rhythm for the exercise. So so let's talk about the short and long master scenario event listing.